Ghost in the Shell, this movie is celebrating 30 years in 2025. How the time certainly flies. It had its world premiere screening at the Tokyo International Fantastic Film Festival in November of 1995. It didn't make the biggest splash in Japan, at least at first, but it quickly became a classic overseas. And now that we're closing in on its 30th anniversary, we've had all the time to analyze and break this down. So this episode is my little contribution to all of that. And also, this is an opportunity to talk about my favorite anime series. Now, Ghost in the Shell is not my favorite anime movie, but it did kickstart my fandom for the franchise and for a lot of cyberpunk anime and science fiction like it. So I was really kicking myself from my previous podcast, the Treehouse Anime Club. Like, how did I do the entire run of that without talking about the movie that kickstarted my favorite franchise? So what better way to kickstart my new show than by talking about one of my favorite anime films and my favorite anime franchise? All right, welcome back. Let's kick this off with the studio brief. Production IG is founded on December 15th, 1987 by the collaboration of anime producers Mitsuhisa Ishikawa and character designer Takayuki Goto. Originally under the name IG Tatsunoko, so IG for Ishikawa and Goto. So the studio got its start as a subcontractor or like a support studio across various Tatsunoko projects, as well as assisting Studio Pierrot, where Mamoru Oshii also produced a lot of his early work. So where Oshii and IG start to meet is on Patlabor Mobile Police, the 7-episode OVA from 1988 to 89 that was done by Studio Dean. And IG Tatsunoko was a subcontractor on that work. And then followed by 2 film projects, you had Patlabor the Movie 1, also by Studio Dean, where Tatsunoko was listed as production assistants. So the second movie, 1993's Patlabor the Movie 2, IG Tatsunoko was promoted to the main animation studio and shortly rebranded to Production IG, which they've pretty much kept that name ever since. And so for Ghost in the Shell, basically all of the staff who worked on Patlabor moved over to Ghost in the Shell. In fact, movie production began a little bit after Patlabor 2. A few notable entries with Production IG, obviously the Ghost in the Shell franchise, the Psycho-Pass franchise. They worked on Furikuri with Gainax. They also helped with the Neon Genesis Evangelion movies, the rebirth and end of Evangelion. Another Oshii production, Jinro, the Wolf Brigade. We have Skycrawlers, Seirei no Moribito. Haikyuu is another good one. Kuroko's Basketball, Eden of the East. You have the animated sequences for Kill Bill Volume 1. They also worked on Holic, Bloodsea, and Tsubasa. Those are some collaborations with Clamp. And most recently, at the time of this recording, you have Kaiju number 8. I say recent hit because it had the entirety of Crunchyroll's marketing staff behind it, as well as being a pretty solid sci-fi action series in its own right. So I look forward to seeing more seasons of Kaiju number 8. And Production IG overall is known for its cutting-edge animation approach, although in my opinion, Production IG, their eyes can sometimes get a bit bigger than their stomachs, like with Soul Levante on Netflix. This was the first anime animated and produced in 4K. It took 4 years to do it, and it's a 4-minute action sequence with no dialogue. Like you see the documentary of this thing being worked on, and you got this one poor person working on and animating individual strands of hair. And it's a beautiful piece of work, but like 4 years for a 4-minute action sequence that's just like a tech demo, fine. But, you do you, Production IG. If you want a fuller picture of the studio, you can check out my mini-series, The Studio Rundown, which has been published at the same time as this first episode. In terms of the manga author, Masamune Shiro, he is, of course, a celebrated artist and author. He has a bevy of art books as well, some very not safe for work. Obviously, Ghost in the Shell is his best work, and he's collaborated with Production IG on all the subsequent projects. You have Ghost Hound in 2007 for the studio's 20th anniversary, and then Real Drive in 2008. Masamune Shiro studied oil painting at Osaka University of the Arts, and that's where he discovered his interest in manga. His first completed work was in 1983 titled Black Magic, and this was published in the manga doujinshi or independent comic Atlas. Black Magic caught the eye of the magazine publisher Sei Shinsha, who offered him a contract. Shiro's first manga under an official publisher was Appleseed in 1985 and went on to become his first best-selling sci-fi action thriller. Also, his first professional reprint of Black Magic happened soon after. In 1986, he penned a one-volume work, Dominion Tank Police, also got a couple of adaptations, I believe. Appleseed would total 4 volumes by the end of its run in 1989, where he would then move on to his next work, The Ghost in the Shell. Shiro would then pen 2 sequels to The Ghost in the Shell, but it's really the first volume that concerns today's episode. And Ghost in the Shell is an incredibly dense piece of work, with Shiro cramming notes into the margins wherever he can fit them. He has a very particular vision of the future and how his particular cyber technology is created, used, and also manipulated and infiltrated. And so Ghost in the Shell is set in the fictional Newport City, and it's not exactly presented as like an outright cyber dystopia a la Blade Runner, but you can see the clear influences of Philip K. Dick or Isaac Asimov. All the other classics are clearly present. Ghost in the Shell is obviously a cyberpunk series. Computer technology and prosthetics have advanced to the point that cyberization has become quite normal. Many people at the least possess a cyber brain that allows them to access the net, and they can combine with various levels of prosthetic enhancements, enabling a person to go full cyborg if they have the funds. However, being so dependent on this technology opens up a person to infiltration and manipulation by skilled cyber hackers. The story follows members of Public Security Section 9, a counterterrorism special ops task force comprised of former military officers and police detectives led by our titular heroine, Major Motoko Kusanagi. Section 9 tackles a wide array of complex cases involving corrupt government officials and companies. The plot of this movie has Section 9 hot on the trail of a mysterious hacker dubbed the Puppet Master, who has recently ghost-hacked the foreign minister's interpreter in an assumed plot to assassinate the VIPs in an upcoming meeting. But their main investigative leads all end with just more ghost-hacked individuals with seemingly no connection to each other. But then, a government-licensed shell body is illegally assembled and seemingly escapes the factory all by itself, only to be hit by a truck and salvaged by Section 9. As they investigate in what is supposed to be an empty body, Section 9 discovers the presence of a human ghost. But before they can investigate any further, Section 6, the Department Chief Nakamura, suddenly arrives to reclaim the shell body, claiming jurisdiction over the ghost, which he claims is the Puppet Master, lured into a trap set by Section 6. The body suddenly reactivates itself, and the Puppet Master calls out, claiming to be a sentient being and requests political asylum. This instigates a brief argument about what constitutes a human being, but before the argument can be concluded, the Puppet Master is suddenly stolen away in an ambush set by Section 6. This was all a ruse to try and recover the Puppet Master. And what follows is a race against the clock as Kusanagi and Section 9 attempt to rescue the Puppet Master before the true masterminds behind the scenes can erase the evidence. Masamune Shiro's work dives into the philosophical side of cyberpunk as well. You know, the ethics of AI, biotechnology, the whole man versus machine, post-humanism in a computerized world. You've got the impact of cultural heritage in this world as well, when everything is moving at such a blistering pace. And all of the effect of this on the world stage, all of this wrapped in this neat 80s action movie aesthetic. However, at the time, the manga is so dense in its world building and its particular language and all of the terms and the margin notes and even like full page, almost like essays, so many terms that need to be introduced, pages and pages of liner notes. Ghost in the Shell for a time was considered by a lot of people to be the impossible adaptation. Well, enter the man Mamoru Oshii, our highly decorated anime film director. He entered the anime industry at Tatsunoko Productions in 1977. He did storyboards on Time Balkan Yatterman, also added director credits for Time Balkan Zunderman, Science Ninja Team Gatchaman 2, where he then moved on to Studio Pierrot in 1980. The Wonderful Adventure of Nils, he worked on that cartoon. The work that put his name on the map was, of course, 1981 and 1986 has run on the popular Urusei Yatsura series as the director of the first 106 episodes. Also, he directed the first 2 movies, Only You in 1983, and the second movie especially was a big one, still talked about today, and that is, of course, Urusei Yatsura, Beautiful Dreamer in 1985. And in between Urusei Yatsura, Mamoru Oshii directed the first ever OVA, so original video animation. Basically, it's the direct-to-video style content. So he directed the first ever OVA series, Dalos. 4 episodes. It's a sci-fi action series about colonists living on the moon, rebelling against an oppressive government. This was produced by Studio Pierrot. And I think it's pretty much worth checking out as well. I'd be down for covering Dalos in a future episode. So following up Dalos were 2 more big OVA projects. Oshii wrote and directed Angel's Egg, that was produced by Studio Dean, with the collaboration of Yoshitaka Amano, so that's the classic Final Fantasy artist and manga artist in his own right. He also wrote Twilight Q, a 2-part project that he wrote and directed the 2nd episode. Mamoru Oshii is, of course, primarily known over here for his accomplishments as an anime director, but he also fancies himself as a live-action director. So between all of these projects, and specifically between the Patlabor film, Oshii debuted in tokusatsu, so that's just live action, with The Red Spectacles in 1987, with the follow-up Stray Dog, Kerberos Panzerkorps in 1991. And I want to mention the Kerberos or the Hellhound saga for a quick moment, because that's how we get Jinro the Wolf Brigade. But it's this interesting, I guess, alternate history setting, very much where Nazi Germany won World War II and then occupied Japan, establishing this great big authoritarian rule. So you can think of almost like the Man in the High Castle sort of setting. And the Hellhound saga follows the special armed garrison, the anti-terrorism police unit, with powered exoskeletons and healthy dash of diesel punk. And he also worked on some live-action films in the Hellhound saga starring Shigeru Chiba, who was voiced Urusei Yatsura, Dragon Ball, Fist of the North Star. Very well-known voice actor and actor as well, Shigeru Chiba. So, of course, this is a very quick tangent in what is an entire other career in tokusatsu, so forgive me for cutting that short, but I do feel like this is important for the setting of how he came to work on Ghost in the Shell. Because, again, these are 2 movies that he's produced in this universe, and after working on Patlabor the Movie 2, Oshii was ready to return to the Kerberos saga when he pitched Jinro the Wolf Brigade. He pitched it to Bandai Visual, and instead he was given a different project entirely. And I have to say, Oshii has a rather dry wit in his interviews. He's very straightforward. It's pretty funny listening to him, actually, because he's just so dry delivery. So in Oshii's own words, the producer and later president of Bandai Visual, Shigeru Watanabe, took him to a sushi restaurant where Oshii was then handed a proposal. He was handed the manga Ghost in the Shell and was asked to please adapt this, to which Oshii said, okay, because he had no other choice. In his own words, he needed the money. Of course, Jinro the Wolf Brigade did get produced later, but with Oshii as the head writer and Hiroyuki Okiura directing. So Okiura-san is the character designer on Ghost in the Shell. So here he is, he's sitting in a sushi restaurant trying to pitch one project, and instead he's just handed this manga, which Oshii had read Ghost in the Shell prior to it being just foisted upon him. But for the planning phase, he said he had to read the manga over 20 times before he arrived at how he would simplify the property while still keeping the spirit of the work intact. However, for this project, the production schedule and funding was extremely tight. Ghost in the Shell was produced in a mere 10 months on a shoestring budget of 330 million yen, or $3 million US, just about. And as Oshii put it, we had to be so solid in the storyboards and script setting that almost nothing went to waste. It was an incredibly efficient job. And so helping him write this thing, we have on script and screenplay Kazunori Ito. And he's a frequent collaborator with Oshii. He did a series composition on Urusei Yatsura during Oshii's directorship at Studio Pierrot. He also worked on Twilight Q, the Patlabor, and as well as the screenplay for the tokusatsu The Red Spectacles. For some of his solo credits, Ito-san is also involved with Studio Pierrot's Magical Girl Idol series, Creamy Mami. He also worked on Studio B-Train's Dot Hack franchise, beginning in 2002 with Dot Hack Sign. A couple extra screenplay credits. We have The Dirty Pair, Kimagure Orange Road, and Maison Ikoku. He has a real knack for character dialogue just across the board, and I think a big reason The Ghost in the Shell works as well as it does as a movie is to how real the dialogue feels. while also just seamlessly explaining the world to the audience. It doesn't feel like an info dump. There's a lot of just really specific terms to Ghost in the Shell. You have to explain the concept of a cyber brain and cyberization, all the ways that he's trying to do the hacking things, and like the attack barriers, defense barriers, all of the infiltration techniques. It's a very, very technical script, while also being, well, I wouldn't call like Ghost in the Shell, at least the original dialogue, full of banter. That's more like in the English dub. But you do get a sense like just how these people work together and how the whole team meshes. And getting into the character designs, as I mentioned before, this is by Hiroyuki Okiura. He started his professional career at 16 years old at In-Betweens for 1983's Armor Trooper Votoms. That was created and directed by Ryosuke Takahashi over at Sunrise. Okiura was involved in key animation on 1988's Akira. He was also on Pat Labor the Movie and Movie 2. He also worked on 1995, the anthology work Memories, that's directed by Katsuhiro Otomo. Hiroyuki's directorial debut was in 1999 with the aforementioned Jinro the Wolf Brigade, and so for there he kept going. He directed the opening credit sequences to 2001's Cowboy Bebop the Movie. Also, he returned to Ghost in the Shell as the character designer on 2004's Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence. And from there, he's mainly contributed as a key animator. You have Satoshi Kon projects, so he worked on Paranoia Agent and Paprika. He worked on Ghost in the Shell, Standalone Complex, Second GIG. He was also involved in Ghost in the Shell Arise. And then going back a little bit, he worked on the 2001 animated film Metropolis. And that's just some of the top-level things, like some of my favorites. More recently, he was involved with Mobile Suit Gundam, The Witch from Mercury. So, of course, to talk about these character designs a little bit, I want to, of course, draw comparisons and differences between the movie and the manga. Because you look at the Ghost in the Shell manga, there's a lot of the classic just 80s, the hairdos. They have a couple of chibi cutaways. Also, got a couple of random jokes about the Major being, tough gorilla lady by all of the guys behind her back. I would say Hiroyuki's designs are a lot more grounded, really just reins it in. This also goes into the animation style, which will go in a minute here. The movie just feels as close to real world as they could get, also with doing this retro futurism style of it. He also trimmed the cast down, so Oshii wisely, I think, did not attempt to cram in all members of Section 9. Because what I think he rightly noticed is even the source manga mainly focuses on a trio. You have Major Motoko Kusanagi, her right-hand man Bato, and then the police detective everyman Togusa. Then you have a guy named Ishikawa providing data support, and of course the occasional cuts to section leader Aramaki. The remaining three are Saito, Pazu, and Borma. Now, they have their own arcs in the manga and, of course, later adaptations like Standalone Complex, but for this movie, they really wouldn't have much to do. So Paz and Borma are pretty much written out of the movie. Saito might be I think he gets a name drop. It's like a blink and you miss him deal, or he may be still in the Section 6. He might still be a police sniper in this film. Later on, there's a sniper who takes out the driver of one of the getaway cars in the final arc. So I think it's like implied to be Saito, but he hasn't come over to Section 9 at this point. Cast list aside, I think it was, for this movie and for this adaptation, and really for a lot of the future adaptations, this was like the groundwork for almost like the look of the series. For Standalone Complex, they would give the Major a little more of like a anime, air quotes, hairstyle. But the Major is a kind of a character. She's full cyborg, and she, in the future series, like she body swaps a couple of times anyway. So as far as her base look, even in the film, it's implied that her body is just a mass-produced model. And there's a little bit of internal conflict that she has about that. In fact, it's a big driving conflict of the entire movie. Everybody else looks pretty much how they will appear in later series. I would say, I think the manga style has its own charm, but for what Oshii was trying to do with this film, I think it would have been a mistake to use the manga designs or to be closer to the manga designs. I think the grounded approach really does help bring across the seriousness of tone that the movie's going for. This is a solid foundation for the start, and it really was a template for the rest of the franchise to follow. So let's get into more designs, specifically the mechanical designs. So first off, we have Shoji Kawamori, who almost needs like no introduction. But for those of you who may not know, Shoji Kawamori is the legendary co-creator of the Super Dimension Fortress Macross series with fellow designer Shinichiro Watanabe. And he's one of the guys who popularized the concept of transforming mecha. Specifically, Kawamori was involved with Takara Tomi's Diaclone toy series. This is obviously the precursor to the Transformers. Kawamori designed Prowl, Blue Streak, Ironhide, Ratchet, and a little robot named Convoy, later to be known as Optimus Prime. Anime-wise, Kawamori-san has design credits across multiple properties. Obviously, the Patlabor projects. He worked on Crusher Joe, Aquarion, The Vision of Escaflowne, which has some absolutely beautiful robots. Iraka 7. He was a mechanical designer on Cowboy Bebop and Outlaw Star. They have his fingerprints all over them. Another mechanical designer, Atsushi Takeuchi, who's a production IG employee. He was a key animator on Appleseed, plus mechanical design assistants on Appleseed. He did key animation on the Patlabor movies, worked on Megazone 2-3, and Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water. That's a Gainax production under Hideaki Anno. He's got multiple designer credits, but most famously, I would say, is Tenchi Muyo, starting with the 1992 OVAs. He returned with Ghost in the Shell 2 as the mechanical designer. He also worked on Skycrawlers, and later, I believe Appleseed 13 was a CG work. He's also involved with the Psycho Pass franchise and the new Legend of Galactic Heroes. He directed, as part of Ghost in the Shell Arise OVA projects, he directed Part 2, Ghost Whispers. That's 2013, plus he did some design works, key animation, supervision, props, and weapons design. He also did mechanical animation direction on Ghost in the Shell Arise, the new movie, in 2016. One notable aspect that is missing from the film is Section 9's Fuchikomas. And these are one-man spider tanks. They're like on rollers that are used by members of Section 9 as transport and combat support. And they have their own onboard AI. They all communicate with each other. And it's a way for Masamune to explore the use of AI in his comic, while also the Fuchikomas are kind of like the comic relief. And they're an interesting aspect of the original property. It's something that they have a lot of banter between themselves that's always comedic, but then they're all wondering about the nature of life or whatever kind of various human experience, or maybe they're commenting on the mission and like, what's the human element of this mission? They also really love Bato. Bato has a particular favorite that he's always feeding, like natural oil versus everyone else getting the synthetics. And Major Kusanagi is not the biggest fan of the Fuchikoma. She sees them as more like tools. So it's a way for the cast to bounce off of them as well. And so comic timing, nature of humanity as being talked by chirpy robotic AI. But if you've only ever seen Ghost in the Shell, this movie, then imagine the Fuchikomas as like a miniature one-man version of that giant battle tank that she faces off against at the end of the film. But I did just want to mention them because, well, I think the designs are cool, and I like the banter between them and the Major and her crew. That's something that really needs to be developed over a series. It would have been, with everything else that's being thrown at the audience, I think Oshii wisely kept them out, even though, again, they're really cool designs, and they have a lot of movement options. They can shoot out webs and like swing through the city as like spider tanks. And so there's a lot of cool movement and things that you can do with them in animation, but for their real use, I think if he had tried to do Fuchikomas as they are in the comic, it would have taken away from the seriousness of the film, and it would have felt like it would have felt thrown in, I think, is what I'm trying to say. But I do wanted to mention them real quick. Obviously, the giant spider tank at the end is one of like the highlight scene of the movie. So I'm going to get back on track and go away from the Sir robots not appearing in this film. Let's talk about weapons design. This is a man named Mitsuo Iso. He's done key animation on Neon Genesis Evangelion, as well as the film End of Evangelion. Specifically, he animated a good chunk of Asuka's final stand in the nerve base near the end of that film. He's also worked on Giant Robo, The Day the Earth Stood Still. That was part 5 of that OVA series. He worked on Golden Boy, another OVA series. Mobile Suit Gundam, Char's Counterattack, also served there as an animation director. And the quick dip into sound design. Sound design was done by a company called Big Shot. and not the Bounty Hunter program from Bebop, although a nice little callback. The director, Kikuo Noel-Tomi, I think that's his, I hope I pronounced that right. Kikuo Noel-Tomi. He's a gun expert and a consultant for effects work in TV series and films, so obviously he was a consultant for this one. And he's also listed for the sequel film, Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence. He also worked on Library Wars. He's worked on Golgo 13, the TV series, for sound design, specifically for guns. And as part of the sound design, obviously you have to have a little bit of fun. So the Ghost in the Shell team went to Guam for some hands-on research at a firing range. I imagine that was a pretty fun day. Getting into more of the art and animation side, we have art director Hiromasa Ogura. He's an art director on Appleseed, Royal Space Force, the Wings of Oniyamis. He was on the Patlabor Mobile Police Force OVAs, and then from 1988, and then he worked on both Patlabor movies. He was also attached to art director on Ninja Scroll in 1993. After Ghost in the Shell, he's worked on Holic, so the 2006 TV series and its various sequels. We only ever got the first season over here, and I don't even know if it's available anymore. It was like a Funimation thing exclusively. He's also worked on Black Butler Season 1. One of my favorites, 91 Days. He's a character design, art director, chief animation director, also background art. When Mamoru Oshii was looking for how he wanted to visualize Newport City, he very quickly decided on Hong Kong. As he describes it, a city teeming with information. You know, Hong Kong, especially at the time, was just known. You look at pictures of it, and it's just all these advertisements strung from everywhere. This is visual noise of everything combined with the vehicle traffic and all the people. Oshii was like, Hong Kong is the perfect way to represent this network of information, this constant flow of information and just visual and audio noise that is supposed to be integral to the world building of Ghost in the Shell. And also, while he was visiting Hong Kong for location scouting, he got caught in a thunderstorm, which is how we got the film's interlude sequence of the whole rainstorm coming down in Newport City. And so Ogura-san was supposed to help come up with all these designs. And so yes, absolutely, the city of Newport is just completely packed. Every frame that shows this city is just packed with so much detail. In fact, it's one of those things, if I don't pause the movie, it's like there's so much information, my brain automatically just pushes it into the background, which it's one of those things I started to, when I was getting ready to review this, and one of the things I was taking in my notes, it kind of struck me of just how much there really is and how much that is just masterful visual storytelling without having to go into all of the in-depth cyber side of it, of just, yeah, this is a world just overwhelmed with information. And it's like, you know, the classic thing of nowadays, we would call it doom scrolling, of just there's so much being thrown at us every day across all kinds of social media that our brains just throw it into the background. It's like it just turns into a white noise. And to see that represented all the way back in 95 is all of this just stuff on screen. Real props to the art direction team, because these are some incredibly detailed backgrounds. And Newport also has an added little feature of almost, I wouldn't really call it a Venice, but it has entire like water canals and streets. Like this is very much a port city. So you have boats and various taxis. It's not a city of flying cars either. Everything's very much firmly on the ground. So it's one of those things that feels futuristic, but just goes from all the classic cyberpunk coded neon and the aforementioned advertisements. You've got cybernetics just kind of floating around in the wild, but it also feels like it could be something that I could walk outside and it just feels like it's every day. Just, it feels mundane and futuristic at the same time. It's just such a really cool aesthetic that I really want to credit Ogura-san and Mamoru Oshii and just the whole design team in general. Complementing this, we have the animation director Toshihiko Nishikubo. He, of course, worked on Patlabor 2. He was the sequence director, which is basically the movie equivalent of an episode director. And then he also returned as a sequence director for Ghost in the Shell 2. And then for the CGI that is in this film, we have a man named Seiichi Tanaka. And so after Ghost in the Shell, he would go on to be the CG director for the 1997 film Kikansha Sensei. And he also worked on the CG for Neon Genesis Evangelion, the end of Evangelion. And so to talk about the animation process, including the CGI, this is a lot of this I pulled just straight from the making of featurette, which was originally a Laserdisc extra, and it's also available to watch on YouTube. And if you have the Lionsgate Blu-ray, they restored a lot of those features that is not in the Anchor Bay Blu-ray. So Seiichi Tanaka, the CGI director, he produced the opening credits text sequence. So the whole scrolling code and then turning into letters. He just converted the names of the film staff into computer code and just ran that on screen. A quote in the extras that I find rather funny by him is like, he said, "You can go frame by frame if you're an insane person and see how I did it, but he said, I just thought it would be cool to do that." So a little funny aside from the extras. But what made Ghost in the Shell, as far as the animation process, and part of the thing that made it such a revolutionary film at the time, is Ghost in the Shell was produced in a process at the time was called digitally generated animation. So this is once touted as like the future of animation. It combined cell animation and computer graphics and the audio. All of it was then scanned, entered as digital data on the computer, and then the editing was also done via computer on what was called the AVID system, AVID. This is allowing for like quicker and more flexible editing tools, also importing mixed media options. So basically all the images and audio were put on a hard disk and edited directly on the computer as what they called a non-linear editing process. So this eliminated all of the manual swapping of cells and all the scenes, and of course has been the industry standard for decades at this point. But at the time of this film, we're still a couple of years out from the industry phasing away from cells to the fully on-screen. The Avid system also allowed for various effects, like the lens effect specifically. You could distort the front shot versus the background, allowed for a lot of greater sense of depth. It also had like a blurring effect. The background was moving like, quote, out of focus of the camera. And this would be something that cell animation just couldn't really do this. It was literally warping the cell, or it was literally warping the image. And it was something that traditionally couldn't really do, or would be like very hard to do, or like you maybe would have to animate the warping. The chief special effect, I'd say like one of the highlights, was Motoko's thermo-optical camouflage, which basically manipulated the illustration in tandem with the background to create a localized distortion effect in the shape of Motoko Kusanagi or whatever other shape they needed. She wasn't the only one with this super invisible, super duper camo. Really helps this film stand out in tandem when we're put against all this realism versus the exaggerated physical abilities of the cyborgs. People jumping out of helicopters or doing all of this rooftop shenanigans. And Nishi Kubo, again, the animation director, he highlighted the tank scene in particular as an example of this movie's realism. If you really pay attention, the bullets spark when hitting metal, but don't spark when they strike stone. Again, as mentioned before, guns have they have a real weight to them in the movie. I would also like to shout out the water effects in this movie. Just absolutely stunning water effects work. And this was done like hand animation style for the most part. And while this digitally generated animation, DGA did not become the new industry standard. It just went full digital. It's an interesting footnote into the industry shift to digital production workflows. Ghost in the Shell is basically the highlight movie/tech demo for this technology. So I think I've said about all I want to on the animation side of things and a little bit of the sound design. Well, let's jump into the music. The composer for the film is Kenji Kawai, and he's also worked on several projects with Mamoru Oshii. You've got Blue Seed, the Mobile Police Patlabor OVAs, also the Patlabor movies. He returned for Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence. Outside of Oshii-directed works, Ranma 1/2 fans will be very familiar with Kenji Kawai. He also did the music for the late 1980s Devilman OVAs. And later, he worked on Kenji Kamiyama's Moribito, Guardian of the Spirit. That was 2007, and more of a traditional wind and almost like tribal sound, which if you ever happen to watch Moribito, Guardian of the Spirit, and then listen to this movie, you'll certainly see like, okay, he took a little bit of template from here. Of course, the opening credits theme and the primary motif of the soundtrack is obviously the making of the cyborg, later echoed in the film in the track Reincarnation, the third chant. It's like the main motif of it. The lyrics of this one were composed by Kawai in the ancient Japanese language and sung in the style of a Bulgarian folk music. And he actually wanted a Bulgarian choir to sing it, but he couldn't find any Bulgarian choirs to sing, so he found a Japanese choir. It was actually, he brought in the Rama 1/2 choir. And so as for the lyrics, I do want to talk about just a couple of lines, because at least for the versions of this film I've watched, there are no subtitles for the music, but I find the lyrics to this song very fascinating because of just how well it foreshadows the film. So again, this is the song Making of a Cyborg that is playing at the beginning of the film as Motoko Kusanagi's body is being created. Because I had danced, the beautiful lady was enchanted. Because I had danced, the shining moon echoed. Proposing marriage, the gods shall descend. The night clears away, and the chimera bird will sing. There's another translation that reads like, when I dance, beautiful women become intoxicated. When I dance, the bright moon resonates. At night, the gods come down. When the night breaks, the white thrush sings. And so when I was looking up this song, there are, of course, multiple ways to interpret that translation as also the specific meaning, but generally you can get that at some point in this movie there will be a union between a godlike being and a mortal, and there will be something new that is made. And they're telling you this at the beginning of the film. And so I remember the first time I was watching this film, and I was expecting something more techno or electronic or just anything but this Buddhist chant or this Buddhist style chant. Again, this music is not what I associate with the cyberpunk aesthetic at all, and it really threw me for a loop the first time. And it was one of those, it did such an effective job of, I guess I would say like unsettling me, but it wasn't like I was creeped out or anything. But, you know, I go in with an expectation, and then immediately my expectation is flipped on its head. So now that kind of sets me up for the rest of the film, because the movie soundtrack overall is like pretty melancholic. Even in action scenes, there's really not a lot of heavy synth or guitar tracks for chase scenes. Sometimes there's just no music entirely. All of a sudden the music just drops and the sound design is the only thing that we hear. And it's the music, air quotes, of footsteps and rustling of clothes and then sudden gunfire. The music only kicks in once the shooter thinks he's gotten away. And even then it's very soft and mysterious. You know, something of like the hunter is now becoming the hunted. If you want some more modern examples of Kenji Kawai's music, obviously, Mob Psycho 100 and all the kazoos is pretty close to... Well, I'm not going to say Mob Psycho is close to Ghost in the Shell. It's doing its own thing entirely. But Mob Psycho 100 is, of course, like a big premiere thing that I really like. He also came back for The Fire Hunter, which is one of those like written by Oshii. Really, like The Fire Hunter, if you think about it, it was almost a sort of a reunion for some of these guys who had worked on Ghost in the Shell and like Oshii in particular. He's also done, Kenji Kawai has done music for Code Geass, Rose of the Rebellion. So yeah, the music is just, in this movie, is absolutely incredible. It's not something, though, that I really listen to in isolation. I think I really enjoy the music in the moment of the movie. And aside from Making of a Cyborg, it's something that I can really appreciate. And I think I would really love to, I think what I'm trying to say is I would really love to hear this in a concert setting, but it's not something that I have on my daily playlist of anime music if I'm just hanging out or having on in the background while working. So we're getting near the end now, and it's finally time to talk all about the actors. So the first thing I want to mention as far as the Japanese staff versus the English staff, for this movie, the English staff for these characters are mostly one-offs, whereas the Japanese cast has started with these characters and have largely retained their roles throughout the Ghost in the Shell franchise, except for Arise, Ghost in the Shell Arise, which is like a prequel/reboot with the younger versions of these characters. They kind of brought in a new cast for that. And so starting us off is, of course, our main hero, Motoko Kusanagi. She's obviously the leader of Section 9, or like the field leader. She's the all-around capable badass and just a really cool character. I like how she's presented here as in charge, and then a lot of the movie is dealing with her own internal psyche struggles. Because again, she's a full cyborg. Supposedly, all that's remains of her because of a major accident is her brain and a little bit of like her brain stem. That's it. She's entirely robot otherwise. And so it is a thing of, you see how capable she is in the field, but then her quiet moments, she's more contemplative and always wonders, like, what am I really working towards? Do I really exist? It's the real crux of the film. And as far as her voice actress, we have a bit of sad news because Motoko Kusanagi's voice actress is the recently deceased Atsuko Tanaka. She passed away in August 2024 at the age of 61. I do not have her successor written down because, again, she's maintained the voice as Motoko up until the most recent thing. So we do have a new Ghost in the Shell project coming in sometime in 2026 with Science Satoru adapting it. But again, there's no cast list at the time of this recording. So yes, Atsuko Tanaka, in addition to Kusanagi, she voiced a couple of video games. She voiced Bayonetta and Rosa, as well as her voice lines in the Super Smash Bros. Series. She was the voice of Ultimecia, the villainess from Final Fantasy VIII during her time in the Dissidia Final Fantasy franchise. Back to anime, she was the voice of Cyrene from Devilman Crybaby, as well as Amida Arca from Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans. And she was known for her sexy, sultry, mature characters, and a good mix of heroes and villains. Her Ultimecia voice is more like her villainous side, Cyrene, Bayonetta, but primarily I would know her as the voice for Kusanagi. She really defined the character for me in Japanese, so I think her successor has a lot of big shoes to fill. So in English, Motoko is voiced by Mimi Woods, who actually reprised the role in Ghost in the Shell video game soon after, as it was when it came over to the US. So I believe it was the PlayStation 1 Ghost in the Shell game that came over. Mimi Woods has also voiced Shayla from El Hazard, and Larry Feldnut, I think I said that right, from Battle Athletes. She retired from voice acting in 2002 and was replaced as the voice of Motoko Kusanagi by the titular Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, who came into the role starting with Standalone Complex. And if there's anyone who can match Tanaka's delivery in English, in my mind, it's Mary Elizabeth McGlynn. She is the major. But I would like to give the deserved credit to Mimi for setting the performance. She set the groundwork for a lot of what Mary Elizabeth McGlynn started. When she started voicing Motoko Kusanagi, I could tell she was taking a lot of cues from Mimi Woods, and then through Standalone Complex, she started to make the character more her own. The first time I remember watching this film, I actually thought I was listening to a younger Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, until I then saw the credits, my first time watching the movie. So that's how close they are, at least at first. Moving down the line, we have the Major's right-hand man, Bato. And he is voiced by Akio Otsuka, who has a laundry list of video game and anime credits, plus some narrations. Of course, he's still the voice of Bato, as well as the voice of Solid Snake in the Metal Gear Solid franchise, Ansem and Xehanort in Kingdom Hearts, Oda Nobunaga from Onimusha, even a joke character. He voices the Nopon Sage in Xenoblade Chronicles. He's supposed to be this cute, fluffy creature, big voice. Also, he voices Yurichiro Hanma in the Netflix version of Baki, and boy, does he kill it as that character. He is the Skull Knight in Berserk. He voices Blackjack from, Blackjack. And Akio Otsuka is also a recent inheritor to the role of Daisuke Jigen in Lupin III Part 6. In English, Richard Epcar gets the role of Bato, and he is still the role of Bato, I believe. Of course, Epcar being from Epcar Entertainment for voice acting and ADR. And of course, he's held on to his role as Bato in all the future entries. He's also the voice of Gemma Himuro from Ninja Scroll, Joseph Joestar in Stardust Crusaders and Diamond is Unbreakable. He's also voiced Daisuke Jigen and Inspector Zenigata for basically over a dozen Lupin III projects. And he also voices Ansem and Xehanort in Kingdom Hearts. Go figure. Raiden in Mortal Kombat, also the Joker from Injustice Gods Among Us. And yeah, again, one of those, Akio Otsuka has a really just deep, legendary voice. And then you have Richard over here going, all right, I see you. and delivers it almost exactly. Like, again, just almost like a one-to-one, despite being, and also just similar roles, despite being across the world from each other. So yes, Epcar Entertainment has done multiple Lupin III projects, a lot of scripting and ADR. He also worked on Masaki Yuasa's short film Kick Heart, and he was a voice director on that with his wife Ellen as a producer. He was the ADR director on Hajime no Ippo, and its, I believe, an immediate sequel film, Champion Road. Richard Epcar, of course, in classic fashion, voices the grumpy Genji Kamigawa, Coach Kamigawa, in the Hajime no Ippo series in the movies. Moving next to Togasa, who's the everyman dad of the group and the only non-cyborg, although he does have a cyber brain, but everything else is all natural. And in this movie, he's still basically a probie. He's very new to the group, and he's not sure of his role at first. Yet Motoko puts a lot of trust in his observations because Togasa is able to see things that the rest of the team might overlook, and he can't be cyber hacked really like they can. Motoko clearly says, you are the person who really kind of like the linchpin of this group in a way, because all of them are so specialized and all think a very certain way, whereas Togasa is the only one who's married. Sometimes whenever he's done observations, even when the rest of the team kind of goes like, okay, come on, get real, you'll see like Kusanagi, and this is more like standalone complex stuff where he really gets to shine, but you'll see like Kusanagi really give him her ear. And when she does provide criticism, it's always like he really takes it to heart. And so Togasa is kind of, again, he's kind of like he's not the beating heart of this film, but it's really standalone complex and also Innocence. Ghost in the Shell 2, he gets paired up with Bato a lot. So Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence is really the Bato and Togasa film, which I really like it for that. So Togasa is voiced by Koichi Yamadera, who's again one of the most recognized voices in anime. You've got Spike Spiegel from Cowboy Bebop, Ryoji Kaji from Evangelion, Jubei from Ninja Scroll, Inspector Zenigata on Lupin III since around 2011. So another, well, I say recent inheritor. Lupin III people keep their roles basically until they can't speak anymore or death, whichever happens first. So Inspector Zenigata's only had a couple of folks on him. On live action dubbing, Koichi Yamadera also gets to flex his comedic muscles as the dub over for Jim Carrey. He's dubbed over Will Smith, Eddie Murphy, several others. Koichi Yamadera is like a pretty funny guy, actually. And he's done a lot of dramatic and comedy settings. He's one of those actors who was like in everything for anime voice acting. Like the 80s and the 90s was just inescapable. And obviously he's still active today, but nowhere near as busy as he was back in the day. But it's still one of those, as soon as a character opens his mouth, it's one of those like, okay, that's a Koichi Yamadera character. Like he's just that recognizable of a voice. So voicing Togasa in English is Christopher Joyce. And this is actually one of the shortest lists of voice roles across the entire cast in both languages. Togasa is his main role, while he also does a couple of background characters. He did background characters in like Akira, Trigun, Cowboy Bebop. He did Giant Robo, Blackjack OVAs, and the Blackjack movie. So basically active during the late 80s and 90s. Just Togasa is like his main character stuff. The rest has been like incidentals. Next one we have Ishikawa, the guy in the chair for the team, if you want to call him that. So Ishikawa is the guy who investigates in the background while the team does like all the field works. He does the data support in the field. He can also he's also the guy who like hacks into all the databases. And then if you want his role like in this film and other stuff, Ishikawa is like the exposition guy. Ishikawa is voiced by Yutaka Nakano, who voices a lot of old man characters. Ishikawa is also this kind of old-fashioned, I'm too old for this shit energy about him. He almost never goes into the field. And he's kind of the old man of the group. And Yutaka Nakano continues to voice Ishikawa. He's also voices the president in the Shadow the Hedgehog video game. He voiced Henry Barrymore in 2008's Black Butler. He voiced the King in Rising of the Shield Hero, as well as the Granddad in Quintessential Quintuplets, if you're looking for some more recent roles. And in English, we have Michael Sorek in his only outing as Ishikawa. He's also done some ADR and dubbing directors. He was on Digimon Adventures. He worked on the Viz Media dub of Sailor Moon. He did ADR and dubbing director for Komi Can't Communicate. That's over on Netflix. And then as other voice acting roles, he's done Hiroshi Agasa in Detective Conan. He's done multiple Digimon across the series, but specifically on Digimon Adventure. He was the narrator across all seasons of Mob Psycho 100, as well as voicing the spirit Dimple. And he's done various background voices during the Sailor Moon Viz Media dub. Next up, we have the Chief of Section 9, Aramaki. He assigns the missions and deals with the messy political side of the spectrum to keep Section 9 independent so Multico and crew can do their thing. And until 2017, he was voiced by Tamio Oki, who passed away in 2017. And Oki-san was voicing Old Man as far back as 1970, back in Tomorrow's Joe. So some extra roles. He was Dr. Tenma in 1980's Astro Boy, Tom Petty in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Lasal Lobos in Legend of the Galactic Heroes, various characters across Lupin III, parts 2, 3, a couple of the films like Bye Bye Lady Liberty, From Siberia with Love, and Napoleon's Dictionary, to name a few. He did not reprise his roles as Aramaki for the standalone Complex series. That was instead taken up by Osamu Saka. But Oki-san did return for Innocence and the later re-release of Ghost in the Shell 2.0. In English, Aramaki was voiced by William Frederick Knight, who also passed away at the end of 2022. And I think he's the only other person in English cast aside from Richard Epcar to hold on to his role as Aramaki on all subsequent roles. He was also Gordon Rosewater in the Big O, Danzo Shimura in Naruto Shippuden, Kuzemi in Araka 7, Notarlin from Metropolis, which the 2001 film that I want to cover in the relative near future. And then he also had a fun role in Paranoia Agent as the Old Man, where he was basically just Daisuke Aramaki if the character had dementia. And lastly, the role that I want to talk about is our villain for the movie, the Puppet Master. Voiced by Ayamasa Kayumi, another veteran voice talent with credits spanning all the way back into the 60s until his death in 2014. To give you an idea of what his voice is like without playing any clips, he is listed as the official voiceover actor for Frank Sinatra and Donald Sutherland. So that's the kind of voice delivery that he's giving. He was also McCoy in Area 88 and Neferati Cobra in One Piece. Now in English, the Puppet Master was voiced by Tom Weiner, or otherwise known as Abe Lasser, who passed away in July of 2024. And he did ADR and scriptwriting across several projects. He was involved with Samurai Champloo, The Lensman, Great Teacher Onizuka, Megazone 2-3 Part 2, and Fist of the North Star the movie, to name a couple of roles. He also gave voice to various characters in Lupin III, The Castle of Cagliostro, Lupin III Part 2. He was Chubby in the Robot Carnival anthology series. Hazanko in Outlaw Star. He's voiced Wisdom in Pretty Cure and Goro Hoshino in Planetess. The ADR production for the English dub of Ghost in the Shell was handled by Kevin Seymour's company Animes. They also handled Standalone Complex, they did Cowboy Bebop, Trigun, Code Geass, some video games, they did Xenosaga Episode 1, Dot Hack, and some PS2 Castlevania games. Animes was around until roughly 2010 and officially closed in 2014 after Kevin's death. As far as the recording studio, we have Magnitude 8 Post, owned by husband and wife duo Les and Mary Claypool, who they also did the recording for Standalone Complex, Akira, Code Geass, they did Ninja Scroll, The Big O, Royal Space Force, The Wings of Oniami's. Les handled the audio mixing while Mary was given the script by Kevin, and she was given just 2 weeks to adapt the translation into an English script. She's usually says, in interviews, she said she's usually given like 4 to 6 weeks. So needless to say, Mary got right to work. And the end result is very faithful to the Japanese dialogue, but it is a little more wordy, but only because there are spaces in the Japanese dialogue where there is strict silence. So she adds in, I wouldn't say she adds in filler words. It's not so much for that. It's not just that she said this is silent, it needs noise. It wasn't like that at all. It's more she added a little bit extra context to a few scenes. Now, she did sneak in a couple of jokes like Togasa being snarky while arresting the runaway garbage truck drivers. There's Bato's, oh yeah, I just rescued you with my standard issue big gun, using the gun to take down the giant spider tank at the end of the movie that's like as big as him. But overall, I think there is merit in certainly checking it out in English is the easiest way for us to look at it nowadays, and the English dub really holds up. I think it's a really good dub, but it's almost like a different movie. If you're so used to watching this movie in English, I do encourage you to check out the Japanese dialogue and see just how different of a movie it comes across. Like, it really is, because those moments of silence are Oshi's way of doing a lot of like showing, not telling. And it's not like Mary just threw in dialogue for the sake of it, but it does make it feel more, I guess, contemporary of a dub versus the Japanese track, which maybe is, what's the word, more ponderous, pensive at times. So I think both of them work, both interpretations work, but I would recommend watching both. And so on that note, let's get into my closing thoughts for real. So like I said at the top, this movie kickstarted my fandom for the Ghost in the Shell franchise. After watching this, I immediately checked out Standalone Complex, which became my favorite anime. It is a different continuity. There's a bit of a confusion sometimes when I talk to folks about where should you start. Ghost in the Shell, this movie is really important from both a film history side and both considered a really freaking good movie. But you don't need to necessarily have the background of this movie to go into Standalone Complex. It'll just make some of the homages in Standalone Complex to this film a bit easier to parse, but they are quite literally like different continuities. Everything is based on the manga. There's not been a literal translation of manga to the screen. There have been multiple interpretations. You have this one, you have Standalone Complex, you have Arise, you have the live action. You don't need to start with this to get into the franchise, but it's a really great starting point to get into the franchise. This movie holds up. And to touch on this film's legacy for a little bit more, Ghost in the Shell is, rightly so, one of the most influential anime produced, right up there with Akira and Project Eiko, if we're to talk about some of its contemporaries. And the theatrical run in Japan wasn't spectacular, but the overseas audience more than made up for it. Along with a consistent following in the home video market and the rental space, Ghost in the Shell was really appreciated over here in the States and internationally. It did very well. It was nominated for Best Animated Picture in the 1996 Annie Awards. This is alongside Balto, James and the Giant Peach, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and that year's winner, Toy Story. And of course, who can forget the story of the Wachowski brothers using Ghost in the Shell as part of their pitch to create the Matrix movie, which on top of stuff like Blade Runner, I think the Matrix makes a very nice double feature with Ghost in the Shell. And both movies handily earn their R rating. I mean, Ghost in the Shell freaking opens up with a naked lady exploding a dude's head, then rappelling down a skyscraper. That's the first 5 minutes. If that doesn't do it for you, I don't know how else to pitch this movie. You've got all the gunplay and kung fu to shake a stick at, but yeah, there is a lot of nudity in this film, but it's not for the express purposes of just voyeurism or shock factor, or I guess not entirely that. The Major does not get naked all the time in the manga. Her whole cloaking technology that's just how he wanted to express it in this film. Usually it's a piece of armor, and like in Standalone Complex, everyone in Section 9 can use this tech, not just the Major. There's just the amount of nudity in this film does make a blind recommendation kind of difficult on its face when you go from that opening scene and then we go straight into the shelling sequence, where again, we're seeing Makoto being built from every angle. But aside from that, and aside from the Major, each character, I think, in this main, or I guess the main trilogy of characters that I mentioned that the film focuses on, they all get their standout moment, and even with Ishikawa and section leader Aramaki providing support. The Major obviously gets the most screen time, being the badass, but Togusa has all of his doubts of being on the team, but he very easily proves his place by following his detective's intuition, so Section 9 has a chance to salvage that ambush by the rival faction of Section 6, when they attempt to kidnap the puppet master. Bato, of course, has his chase scene in the market that even though the Major takes down the guy, it was still an incredible scene, but then Bato also gets to rescue the damsel in distress at the end of the film. If I were to touch on a couple of homages through the Ghost in the Shell series, one of the most obvious is every first episode of Ghost in the Shell opens with a helicopter flying over a city. That's just how we open the movie, and it's a good way to introduce. So that's the first homage that we typically see. You also typically introduce the Major as she is sitting from a high place. So in this movie, it's on top of a skyscraper. Sometimes it's a crane. looking down and listening on the noise of the city. Usually at some point you will have a showdown of cyborg versus a giant robot or a tank. That's not so much an homage, but Standalone Complex Episode 2, not Season 2. Standalone Complex Episode 2 has the Major trying to open the hatch to a giant spider tank that's gone out of control. So it's a bit on the nose, and it's also a really cool scene. Togasa continues to catch strays from the team for sticking with his police-issued revolver, his Matever, and more often than not, you will have at the culmination of the case when the Major is having the heart-to-heart discussion or just having a discussion with the perpetrator, the big person they've been taken down sometimes doesn't survive at the end, but she gets this what I call the moment of eternity between the Major and the antagonist as one or both of them lay dying on the floor. As far as availability, you can find this film on shelves very easily. There's a very nice Blu-ray set by Lionsgate. I picked up mine for like $20. You can also find Ghost in the Shell online very easily. My first search engine result was actually this archive.org link to the Japanese dialogue of English subs. It's on Tubi, Plex, Prime Video. You will not be finding Ghost in the Shell on like Hulu, Netflix, or Crunchyroll that I saw. And I do think the Lionsgate Blu-ray release is the best way to watch this movie. The first time I picked up this film, this is actually my second time buying the movie. Well, technically my third. My first time was buying it over iTunes. But my first Blu-ray was the 2014 Anchor Bay, and the movie, it also had no special features, but it was also missing sound effects and some of the dialogue in the English dub. I didn't notice it at first because it was the only one I had. But then there was little things like, was that always there when I was watching the Lionsgate Blu-ray? Then I looked back, and so the Anchor Bay release is not the best. I am very pleased with the Lionsgate side. I don't have a UHD player, so I can't speak for that. But I will say the Lionsgate Blu-ray also looks crisper than the original Anchor Bay release. But again, the UHD is pretty much the only one on the shelves anyways. That's my recommendation for a Blu-ray side. I'm not a tech breakdown guy or anything. So if you really want to get into the details, there's plenty of things like Blu-ray.com for you to check out. And there's actually, for this episode, there's a little bit of an 11th hour extra inclusion here, because just from recording a few days ago, there was a 20th anniversary screening for Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence, where director Oshii and then Akio Otsuka, again, the voice actor for Bato, they talked about the series, they reminisced about the production of Ghost in the Shell and 2. They talked about Atsuko Tanaka and what she brought to the production. And at the end, or I'd say like in the middle, then through the end, they did this rapid fire Q&A session of just a yes-no sort of thing. And the question of a third film came up, and Oshii held up yes. And so naturally, the interviewer was like, oh, tell us more. And so no, Oshii is not confirming that a third film is in production, nothing like that. He just says he would like to tie up a couple of loose ends, or air quotes. He thinks that he could do a third movie, but there's nothing definitive. But there's at least a stated interest from Mamoru Oshii into returning to the world of Ghost in the Shell. And Akio Otsuka, of course, looked very intrigued about that as well. But of course, we also have the 2026 Science Saru anime version coming up. So we'll have to see how that all pans out. So thank you for listening this far. We're about to jump into my spoiler segment. So if you have not seen Ghost in the Shell 1995 or just aren't interested in the spoilers, then that's perfectly fine. You can end the episode here. So I'm just going to go through what I have coming up next month. So my next episode will be in May. It's another anime review episode with the 2001 anime series Baki the Grappler. And specifically, this anime covers the events prior to the beginning of the 2018 and current Netflix anime series. And this is something that I'm kind of making good on from Treehouse Anime Club. I had promised an episode on Baki the Grappler, and I'd actually written the script and had it all ready to go, and never recorded that. So this is me. You're finally getting your Baki episode. The production committee for Baki actually comes from an unexpected source that I haven't seen very often in the anime industry. So there's music production companies, specifically it's a music production company, which obviously they're involved in anime all the time, but how many record label companies do you know were the lead producers on the anime? I also have another bonus episode. I brought in Tyler from Anime Degens, and we talked about certain slice of life anime series, specifically these 12 episode one and dones, or just any anime that didn't fully adapt the manga that they were sourced from and haven't gotten a new season to finish out that run in multiple years. We're not going to ever get a second season or a conclusion. Yeah, fine, I'll read the manga. So between the two of us, we extensively covered 10 picks, so 5 each, and then a little bit of bonus at the end. So I hope you enjoy that episode as well in May, and we'll check out the Anime Degens podcast as well. So thank you once again for supporting me during my relaunch. Please check out my other episodes, my studio rundown on Production IG, and then my production field guide. Again, let me know how I'm doing in the Spotify comments or wherever you can leave comments from wherever you're listening from. Please give me a review. Let me know how I'm doing. 5 stars if you like what I'm doing. Drop me a follow from wherever you're listening. All the usual podcasty stuff. And I just really appreciate your listenership. And so if you're not sticking around for the spoiler cast, I hope you have a great day, stay safe, and watch more cartoons. For the rest of us, let's jump into some more listener comments right here in a minute. So I'm going to play some music and lead us right into it. So before I talk spoilery segments in this movie and do a little more of a deep dive, I wanted to give you, the audience, a chance to bring in your 2 cents as well. So leading us off is KK Rosy Cheeks, who says, Ghost in the Shell is a movie that I knew I needed to see at some point, and it's a movie that definitely gets better with subsequent rewatches. By the way, I'm glad I watched this before seeing the live-action disappointment with you. KK, I forgot that we watched this together in the theater. I'd forgotten about that. We had a group of friends, and we all got together to watch Ghost in the Shell, the live action. God bless Scarlett Johansson. She tried her best. That's a very flawed movie experience. So getting back to KK's thoughts on the 1995 film, the themes of robotic transhumanism are becoming more necessary to discuss as time carries on, and the atmosphere wraps you in a warm, albeit foreboding blanket. Anyone who's interested in cyborgs, robotics, or androids needs to watch this movie, particularly as a double feature with the Blade Runner director's cut. I think that'd make I mentioned The Matrix right up there, but yeah, Blade Runner especially. Like the manga has a lot, the manga was being written around the same time as Blade Runner. It would have been, I'm sure that Shiro was aware of Blade Runner when he was writing this manga. Fallen Snow Kiku states, Ghost in the Shell was one of the first adult anime I saw, and I distinctly remember starting and stopping it several times over the years as a teen before finally watching it all the way through in my early 20s. Since then, I've seen it now and again every few years, most recently when it was re-released in theaters a few years ago. Yeah, they'll occasionally do theatrical runs of this movie, especially for the anniversaries, so your 25th and 30th. I wouldn't be surprised if they do another one this year if they haven't already. Ghost in the Shell is definitely one of those movies that benefits from the occasional rewatch. I uncover new information every time I see it, even if it's just my own experience affecting my perception. There's a good reason the 1995 movie is seemingly on every new to anime start here list. I don't know if I'd call it my favorite anime movie or even my favorite entry in Ghost in the Shell, but it definitely lit a spark in me. I cannot speak right now. Last and certainly not least, we have Zodiac from the Retro Hangover podcast. I only watched this as a kid, so most of the heavier themes went way over my head. I'd love to get back into it one of these days. There is no doubt that this is one of the most influential anime ever made, certainly for the West and what they would take away from it. Yeah, again, my thing is Matrix and etc. It'll be talking about it to death. Westworld has the shelling sequence, or certainly a referential shelling sequence, than things like iRobot. But yeah, certainly just in animation and cinematography, people definitely took notice over here. Again, Ghost in the Shell was much more popular over here than in Japan. So let's talk a little bit more spoilers. I only have about only like a half a page worth of notes, so it's not going to take me too long. But there were a couple things in here that I wanted to touch on that I thought would be a little spoilery, at least for the main cast. I wanted to keep the main episode more general audiences. So here we go. I really wanted to touch on specifically that moment of eternity in this movie between Motoko and the Puppet Master, both who are beings without reproductive capabilities. Motoko, we've seen a lot of her, mostly through the film, but it's very obvious that no, she doesn't have any organs, and the Puppet Master is obviously stuck in another cyber body. This is where the whole idea of the transhumanism and the digitalization of just everything comes in. And I think these characters raise some interesting points about gender and identity in this film. Both are in clearly female bodies, but also express male tendencies as well. In fact, really strong male tendencies. Motoko has a very male body language and attitude in the film. Very take charge and just very stoic. She's not what you would typically expect out of an attitude from a leading female protagonist. And there's the Puppet Masters is very much, I'm calling him a him because he's got a male pattern voice. And throughout the film, Motoko is clearly struggling with her identity and sense of self, especially because she can't exactly observe her own cyber brain or the little bit of human brain she supposedly has left and spinal cord. The manga explains it like she had a severe childhood accident that basically were only able to salvage her brain and spinal cord, but Motoko can't exactly observe that for herself. So she's not even sure if is she real? Is she made up? Did Section 9 just create her as a ultimate cyber badass? She can't tell. Really comes across as, what makes her human. And she's wondering the only reason that she's treated as human is because the people around her treat her as human. Is she just a doll with a ghost inside? That lovely montage sequence where she's walking around town and she's seeing multiple other instances of her model walking around town, multiple multicos. We get the sense that this is very isolating for her psyche. And again, there is a lot of nudity in this film as well. And Multico's nudity, again, is more shown as like doll-like, artificial. It's not something that she takes pride in. Like, she doesn't seem to have any attachment to her body. She's very doll-like, but she doesn't really even notice that she's naked. So like, nudity in this film is a tool. Like I said, it's a skin suit for the cloaking technology, but Bato is the person who humanizes Multico's nakedness by covering her with his jacket, even as she's standing perfectly still, doesn't even seem to notice that he's there. And the puppet master, for his part, argues that DNA is nothing more than a program designed for self-preservation through genes, which is a very provocative thing to say to the two humans interrogating you about your rights to exist. And the final act is the culmination of all of this, as Multico is now facing certain death against the spider tank. She is clearly not outfitted to take this thing on, but she does so anyways. And her skin suit, her invisibility, is the only brief advantage she has over this thing. And the scene of her dodging a hail of bullets that then shoots up a mural of the Tree of Life, that is just peak cinema. As well as watching her final gambit of attempting to brute force open the hatch, which literally tears her body to pieces as a result. Her arms and everything just fails. You see all the muscles and things tearing. And for the first time, you really see like Multico's interior. Like, this is all cyborg. This is all robotic. But there's something just so human in the futility of, she knows that she's likely not going to succeed, but she has to have these answers. And as stated before in that music section, when I was reading those lyrics, at the end of the film, Multico does merge with the puppet master. Both of them found their own way to exist and die as humans, and thusly the new being, who is still emotionally aware of herself as Multico and all of her experience, this new being has ascended to a higher plane of existence, no longer bound to the shell body. In addition to the Section 6 sniper team that's sitting in that helicopter, that scene at the very final moments transforms, at least to Multico's eyes, transforms into an angel right before her and the puppet master's heads are blown off. But it's too late. Their souls, their ghosts, have already merged and left their bodies into the recesses of the net. And so the ending of this film, in some ways, seemed anticlimactic to me. There was no "we got the bad guy" conclusion. In fact, a lot of the case was wrapped up very quickly and quietly behind the scenes. There's no big press conference. In fact, no one wide public would ever really know what happened that day, and will probably never know. And for that, I can see that it may not be the most satisfying conclusion, but Multico's personal journey is fulfilled. And as she leaves Bato's safe house in her new body that he was able to salvage for her, the newborn overlooks Newport City from a hilltop, wondering where its next journey lies. And for that next journey, I will, of course, be doing an episode later on for Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence, where it will be the Bato and Togasa happy hour, talking about philosophy at each other. So I hope you look forward to that episode when I do get around to it. Again, it won't be immediately after, it probably won't even be this year, but again, it depends on if y'all really want that episode next, or if you want me to go into Standalone Complex next. But for what it's worth, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you haven't seen Ghost in the Shell and you got through all these spoilers, well, I appreciate your bravery, and I hope you'll still check out the film regardless. And so once again, I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you have a great day wherever you are, and to stay safe and, of course, watch more cartoons. I'll see you on the next one.